Welcome to Love and Tears. Before we begin, take a deep breath and let the world slow down for a moment. If this story touches you, leave a comment. It helps us know that these quiet moments still matter. Sometimes the most dangerous belief is thinking that someone who loves you will wait forever. Ethan learned that truth the hard way, not through shouting, not through betrayal, but through the quiet death of connection. His marriage didn't end with an argument. It ended with relief. Her relief. Every time he stopped trying, every time he gave up on reaching her, she looked just a little more at peace. And what came after it would haunt her for years, even if she never found the courage to admit it was her own doing. It began on a calm Wednesday night in October. 3 years into what Ethan had believed was a solid marriage. They were getting ready for bed, following the rhythm of their nightly routine, brushing teeth, changing clothes, settling under the same warm light they'd shared for years. The room was familiar, comfortable. Yet lately it had started to feel different. Like a hotel room, two people sharing the same space, but not the same heart. He sat on the edge of the bed, watching her at the vanity. Her movements were careful, almost rehearsed, as she applied her skincare with the same precision she gave to every other detail of her life. She looked beautiful under the soft lamplight, so effortlessly distant that it hurt to look at her. And still he felt that small, stubborn ache, the one that whispered, "Reach for her." So he did. Just a gentle touch on her shoulder, the kind that once said everything words couldn't. It wasn't a demand. It wasn't pressure. Just love, quietly asking to be remembered. Her response was immediate and predictable. "Not tonight, honey. I'm just exhausted." But this time, something was different. She didn't look tired. She didn't even look sorry. She looked relieved, like someone who had just escaped a chore she didn't want to do. There was a subtle sigh in her eyes, a small drop of tension in her shoulders. That look, that fleeting moment of relief, was the beginning of his awakening. It was when Ethan started to notice things he'd been too trusting, too optimistic, or maybe too naive to see before. They had been together for 5 years, 3 of them as husband and wife. And in the beginning, like most couples truly drawn to each other, intimacy came naturally. They laughed, touched, kissed for no reason. They found each other in every small space of their home while cooking, while watching movies, while saying goodnight. It wasn't just physical. It was how they spoke when words fell short. But slowly, that language faded. For her touch became something to tolerate, not something to crave. Desire turned into duty. The change was so gradual that Ethan didn't see it coming. He adjusted to each new normal, telling himself it was just a phase. First, they went from the playful closeness of newlyweds to a few times a week. Then it became once a week, always planned, never spontaneous. Then every couple of weeks, and even then it felt like she was simply checking a box, keeping up appearances. By the time he realized how far they had drifted, intimacy had become something like a scheduled favor, an interruption in her real life. The excuses grew sharper, harder to argue with. In the early days, if she wasn't in the mood, she'd say it gently, and they'd find other ways to stay close, talking, cuddling, laughing until sleep found them both. Back then, even rejection felt tender, but over time, the warmth disappeared. Her reasons multiplied: headaches, deadlines, stomach aches, fatigue from working out, fatigue from not working out. Each excuse came without comfort, without touch, without an effort to reconnect. It was the silence between the excuses that hurt the most. Have you ever noticed how distance doesn't always begin with a fight? Sometimes it starts with quiet relief. That's how Ethan knew. That's when love began to slip quietly through his fingers. The rejections had turned into walls, solid and quiet, not moments of redirection or tenderness, but barriers she didn't seem eager to break. For Ethan, it wasn't the occasional no that hurt. Life happens, people get tired. Stress changes how we show up. He understood that. What haunted him wasn't the rejection itself, it was the pattern. And more than that, it was her relief. The small, almost imperceptible calm that crossed her face every time he backed away. It wasn't that she didn't want him. It was that she seemed genuinely happier when he didn't want her. On Thursday night, curiosity met quiet heartbreak. Ethan decided to test something, not out of spite, but out of a desperate need to understand. So instead of his usual tender gestures, instead of reaching for her or waiting for the right moment, he simply got into bed, said a soft good night and turned to his side. No touch, no hints, no expectation. It was as if they were two polite roommates sharing a bed out of convenience. And almost instantly, he noticed the shift. She was lighter that evening. More talkative at dinner, asking about his day, actually listening to his answers. More animated when they watched TV, laughing at jokes that normally got just a polite smile. And as bedtime came, she hummed softly, while brushing her teeth, the melody of a woman at ease. The absence of expectation had given her peace. And in that peace, Ethan saw the woman he'd fallen in love with, warm, funny, relaxed. Except now, she was only that woman when she believed he didn't want her. Friday night, he repeated the quiet experiment. Same routine, same restraint, no reaching out, no silent invitation. He simply treated her like a good friend who happened to share his space. Again, she seemed happier, freer. They talked easily, shared stories. She even initiated a hug while they made breakfast on Saturday morning. It had been months since she'd done that. By Saturday, Ethan realized this was no longer a harmless curiosity. It was turning into an experiment with his own heart as the subject. But he couldn't stop. He needed to know, was this all in his head, or had his marriage already begun to fade into something else? That night, he took it a step further. He not only avoided physical touch, he made sure to seem genuinely disinterested. He read quietly in bed while she scrolled through her phone, keeping his tone light and neutral. He treated her like a friend, nothing more. And the result? She glowed. She was radiant, almost effervescent. She chatted about her sister's upcoming birthday, planned a girls' outing, even suggested trying a new restaurant downtown. All the liveliness that had vanished from their marriage reappeared. The moment he stopped wanting her, by Sunday morning, she was humming again, moving around the kitchen with a kind of lightness Ethan hadn't seen in months. She was affectionate, but in the safe, platonic ways that didn't involve touch. She joked, shared gossip from her book club, even complimented his shirt. And then it hit him. Like truth often does, quietly, painfully, but undeniably. She didn't just avoid intimacy. She was happier when he avoided it too. Her ideal version of marriage wasn't passion or connection. It was comfort, and his desire no longer fit into that comfort. From that moment on, Ethan began to notice everything. Not obsessively, but with the clarity of a man finally awake. When he reached for her hand while watching TV, she tensed barely, but enough to feel. When he hugged her from behind while she was cooking, her shoulders stiffened, her smile froze for half a second. And when he suggested showering together, something they used to laugh about, she suddenly had 17 reasons why it couldn't happen. The water pressure, the timing, her mother. But when he kept to himself, when he acted indifferent, when he played the role of a friend instead of a husband, she was content. She'd curl up on the far end of the couch, chatting easily, completely at peace with the distance between them. She talked about her day, her plans, her thoughts about everything except them. And that's when Ethan realized something quietly devastating. She was most herself when he stopped trying to be close. Tell me, have you ever loved someone who seemed to breathe easier when you stopped reaching for them? Because that's where Ethan found himself, in love, but no longer wanted. By the first week of November, Ethan made a decision that, though small, would change everything. Maybe it saved his sanity. Maybe it was the moment he finally stopped pretending not to notice what was right in front of him. He stopped initiating anything physical. No affectionate touches beyond a brief hug, hello or goodbye. No soft gestures, no attempts at intimacy. Not even those quiet, hopeful glances he used to steal when she wasn't looking. He decided to give her exactly what she seemed to want, a husband who no longer desired her. The change was instant. It was like watching someone exhale after holding their breath for months. That Monday night, as bedtime came and went with no approach from him, she looked more at peace than he'd seen her in a long time. She read her book with a gentle smile, chatted lightly about her day at the marketing firm, her voice steady and warm. There was no tension, no bracing herself, no excuses waiting behind her eyes. Tuesday was even easier for her. She started planning little escapes that would keep them apart. A girls' night on Friday, a solo yoga class on Saturday morning, a book club on Sunday afternoon. Her tone was bright, excited, like a woman designing a life she actually wanted to live. "I've been thinking about that pottery class I mentioned," she said over dinner, twirling her fork playfully. "It's on Thursdays for 6 weeks." "That sounds great," Ethan replied, and he meant it. If pottery made her happy, she should have it. And Sarah wants to do a spa weekend upstate next month. "Would you mind if I went?" Months ago, he might have minded. Not because he wanted to control her, but because he would have wanted to go with her, or at least miss her while she was gone. Now, the idea of being alone for a weekend sounded peaceful. "Of course not," he said softly. "You should go." She smiled, grateful, maybe even impressed. "You're so understanding," she said. "I really appreciate that you're not clingy like some husbands." Clingy. Wanting to spend time with his wife made him clingy. On Wednesday, she told her sister over the phone a conversation Ethan overheard while stirring sugar into his coffee. "Things are so much better now," she said lightly. "He's finally understanding my needs, not being so pushy about everything." Pushy. Wanting to connect with his wife made him pushy. He stood there quietly, spoon in hand, listening to her describe his love as a flaw he'd finally grown out of, like a bad habit he'd managed to quit. To her, his desire had been a problem. His distance, a solution. By Thursday, she seemed convinced this new version of him, detached, quiet, unbothered, was the best one yet. She talked more planned, more filled their calendar with activities that kept them busy. But always apart. She made decisions without asking him, not out of defiance, but because she'd decided he didn't need to be included anymore. And then Friday night came 1 week into his quiet experiment. They were having dinner when she smiled across the table and said, "I really appreciate how you've been lately. It's nice to just be comfortable without all the pressure." Ethan set his fork down, looking at her. What pressure, you know? The expectation that we have to be physical all the time. It's so much better when we can just enjoy each other's company without all that drama. Drama. She called his desire for closeness drama. "So you're happier?" he asked carefully. "When I don't want to be intimate with you." She paused, realizing perhaps how that sounded, but instead of retreating, she doubled down. "I'm happier when I don't feel pressured to be something I'm not." He studied her face quietly. "And what exactly are you not?" "I'm not someone who needs all that physical stuff to be happy in a relationship," she said, matter-of-factly. "I thought you understood that by now. We're adults, Ethan. We can have a mature relationship without being all over each other constantly." Constantly. They'd been intimate maybe 6 times that year, and she called that constantly. He nodded slowly. "But I am someone who needs that to be happy in a marriage." "Well," she said, her voice calm, almost superior. "Maybe you need to adjust your expectations. Not everyone is obsessed with sex. Some of us value emotional connection and intellectual compatibility more than physical stuff." Obsessed. Wanting a normal marriage made him obsessed. "Maybe I do need to adjust my expectations," Ethan said quietly, meaning something entirely different than what she heard. She smiled, triumphant. "Exactly. See, this is how it should be. We can be happy without all the complications. We can focus on what really matters." "And what really matters?" he asked gently. "Friendship, companionship, shared goals, emotional support, all the things that last when physical attraction fades." She said it so sincerely, as if describing a perfect world. But to Ethan, it sounded less like love and more like a business partnership. Steady, practical, passionless. That night, as she fell asleep beside him, breathing softly, he lay there, staring at the ceiling. The silence between them felt heavy, permanent. His wife had just told him she was happiest when he didn't want her. And worse, she had redefined his surrender as growth. In her mind, he wasn't losing something precious. He was maturing. He was becoming the kind of husband she could finally feel comfortable with. But comfort, Ethan realized, can be colder than loneliness. And as he lay awake beside her, he couldn't help but wonder how long can a marriage survive when only one person still feels the pulse of desire. The second week of November came quietly, like a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. By then, my experiment, as I had started to call it in my head, had taken on a life of its own. She seemed perfectly at ease in this new rhythm. No tension, no hesitation, no need for excuses. There were no advances from me anymore, and so there was nothing for her to deflect. She could finally exhale life freely without the burden of rejecting affection that was no longer being offered. I began to notice how she talked about me differently to her friends. I'd catch bits of her phone calls drifting through the walls, words soft but sharp in their meaning. She told Janet one morning that I had become mature, that I finally understood boundaries, that I was less needy. I remember standing in the kitchen, coffee cooling in my hand, realizing she had rewritten my quiet withdrawal as personal growth. He's learned to appreciate what we have, she said, instead of always wanting more. Wanting more, she said it as if it were a flaw, as if the desire for connection, for touch, for closeness was something to be ashamed of. By the third week, she had fully embraced this new version of our marriage, the calm, passionless peace of it. On Monday night, she mentioned how Sarah's husband still wanted romance all the time and how exhausting that must be. She smiled, then genuinely thankful that I wasn't like that anymore. I wondered silently when wanting your wife to want you became a weakness. Tuesday, she announced a weekend trip with her sister. Not asked, just informed me. Lisa and I are going to that new spa resort, the weekend of December 10th, she said. I booked it a few months ago. Once that might have stung, not because I wanted to control her, but because she assumed I wouldn't even want to go. Now, I just nodded. She was creating more distance and I was letting her. By Wednesday, curiosity got the better of me. We were both reading in the living room, her legs curled under her, a soft blanket across her knees, and I asked quietly, "Are you happy in our marriage?" She looked up, genuinely surprised. "Of course I am." "Why would you ask that?" "Just curious," I said. "Sometimes it's good to check in." Her eyes softened. "Things are so much better now," she said. "We're not constantly dealing with all those expectations and tensions. We can finally just be ourselves." "What if I told you I wasn't happy?" I asked. Her book lowered slightly. Confusion flickered across her face. "Why wouldn't you be? Everything's peaceful now. We don't fight. We don't have drama. We enjoy each other's company." "Peaceful for you," I said quietly. "But what about what I need?" "You're getting what you need," she said, matter-of-factly. "We have stability. We talk, we laugh, we support each other. Isn't that what marriage should be?" I hesitated. What if what I need includes physical intimacy? The air shifted, heavy cold. She sighed, that same patient tone she used when explaining something obvious. "Then you need to decide what's more important, some physical stuff or a good marriage. Because you can't have both if it means making your partner uncomfortable." There it was, her truth laid bare. In her world, intimacy and a good marriage couldn't coexist. To her, wanting my wife was selfish. Expressing desire was pressure. Thursday night, while we cleaned up after dinner, she said something that made my hands stop mid-motion. "I'm so glad we worked through all those issues early in our marriage," she said, stacking plates like she was setting a memory in place. "What issues?" I asked. "You know," she smiled lightly, "when you were always pressuring me for physical stuff. I was worried we weren't compatible. But you've really grown as a person. You've learned to value the important things." She had rewritten our history, turned the passion that brought us together into something shameful. something she believed I had outgrown. Later that evening, we were on opposite end of the couch, the space between us feeling wider than the room itself. She stretched and sighed with contentment. "This is perfect," she said softly. "This is exactly how marriage should be. Comfortable, peaceful, no pressure, no expectations. I'm so glad you finally understand what really matters." I looked at her, at the woman I had once burned to touch, and asked quietly, "So, your perfect marriage is one where your husband doesn't want you?" She smiled, faintly unbothered. "My perfect marriage is one where my husband values me for more than physical things, where he respects my boundaries and doesn't make me feel guilty for not being interested in all that stuff." "And what if he is interested in all that stuff?" She didn't hesitate. "Then he needs to grow up and learn what love really means." That was the moment I knew. She didn't want a husband. She wanted a roommate, someone to share bills, share space, but not touch, not desire, not disturb her peace. Friday morning, I made my decision. It wasn't anger that guided me. It wasn't spite. It was clarity, the quiet kind that only comes when you finally stopped lying to yourself about what your relationship really is. And when she left that following Tuesday night for her book club to discuss stories about passion she no longer believed in, I started to pack. That Tuesday night, she left the house just before 7, humming softly as she gathered her things. She was going to her book club to discuss another story about longing desire and love conquering all. The irony was heavy in the air, but I didn't say a word. I just stood in the kitchen listening to the sound of her car pulling out of the driveway, fading into the distance. Then I started to pack, slowly, deliberately. No rush, no anger, no music. Just the quiet rustle of folded clothes, the creak of drawers, the whisper of zippers. I took only what was mine: my clothes, my books, my documents, a few photos that reminded me of who I used to be before all of this. I left everything else behind. The furniture, the framed wedding photo, even the mug she'd bought me that said, "Best husband ever." When I finished, I placed my wedding ring on the dresser beside her jewelry box. The small metallic sound it made seemed to echo across the room. Next to it, I laid down my house key, a final punctuation mark to a story that had already ended long before this night. No note, no explanations, nothing to debate, nothing to fix. She had told me what kind of marriage she wanted. I was simply giving her the freedom to have it without me. The drive to my brother's house felt unreal, like I was watching myself from outside the car. 3 years of marriage gone, not in flames or fury, but in silence, in the quiet realization that we wanted completely different things. She wanted peace. I wanted connection. And peace without love is just emptiness with soft lighting. She called me at 9:47 that night. I didn't answer. Then again at 10, 11, midnight. 7 calls in total. I listened to the voicemails the next morning, one after another, like chapters in a book she didn't know she was writing. The first one was confused. "Hey, where are you? Your stuff's gone. This is weird. Call me back." The second was irritated. "This is ridiculous. Whatever you're trying to prove, just come home. We'll talk." The third was angry. "You can't just leave without talking about this. We're married. You don't get to throw a tantrum and run away." The fourth softened. "Please call me back. If I did something wrong, we can talk about it. The fifth was desperate. I know you're getting these messages. This is insane. We can work this out. The sixth called again. Fine. Be childish. But you'll have to come back eventually. You can't just abandon a marriage. And then the last one? Quiet, uncertain. I keep thinking about our conversation the other night. Did I say something wrong? I thought we were both happy. But by then, her words no longer carried weight. They were echoes in an empty house I no longer lived in. 2 weeks later, she started showing up at my workplace. Twice. Security had to escort her out when she refused to leave. 3 weeks after I left, the divorce papers were filed. She contested it, insisting the marriage could be saved with counseling. Her lawyer argued I had abandoned her without trying to fix things. My lawyer simply said, a marriage where one partner celebrates the absence of love is already over. During the proceedings, she told the court I had changed suddenly, that I had been perfectly happy until one day, he just decided he wasn't getting enough physical attention and left. She said it came out of nowhere. Out of nowhere. 3 years of quiet rejection. Months of her calling my needs immature. Weeks of her praising my distance. And somehow my leaving was sudden. The divorce was finalized 6 months later. She kept the house. I walked away with my peace. Friends told me later she thought I'd come back within days, maybe a week. She never believed I could actually leave. 6 months after I ran into her at a coffee shop downtown. She looked tired older somehow, like someone who hadn't been sleeping much. She sat down without asking. We need to talk, she said. We really don't, I replied. She took a deep breath. Maybe I was too rigid. Maybe we could try again. What's changed? I asked. I understand now that physical stuff is important to some people. I could try to be more accommodating. That word felt like a knife slipped between ribs. She still didn't get it. That's not what I wanted, I said quietly. Then what did you want? A wife who wanted me. Not someone who'd tolerate me. She stared at me, her eyes glistening, but distant. I didn't not want you, she said. Just not in that way. Then you wanted a friend, I said softly. Not a husband, and I stood up. Left her there with her coffee cooling in front of her. That was the last time we spoke. A year later, I met Emma. She was everything my ex-wife wasn't: warm, curious, alive. She reached for my hand first. She laughed easily. She thanked me when I kissed her. With her, intimacy wasn't pressure. It was language. It wasn't duty. It was connection. For the first time in years, I didn't feel tolerated. I felt wanted. Emma once asked, after hearing a small part of the story, how lonely was that? And I said lonely in the kind of way that doesn't make noise. The kind that just sits beside you every night, breathing peacefully while you die a little inside. Meanwhile, my ex kept posting online about men who only wanted one thing, about how society had turned love into lust, about how she couldn't find mature men who understood real connection. She still didn't understand that real connection isn't the absence of desire, it's the bridge built from it. 5 years later, she finally had the kind of relationship she'd always wanted: one, without pressure, without expectations, without touch, without anyone wanting her. She was completely alone. And maybe that's the part that haunts me most. Not that she lost me, but that she still doesn't understand. Why? Because in the end, she got exactly what she asked for, a life free from the weight of being wanted. She just never realized that being wanted was what made her feel alive. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for someone is leave them with what they said would make them happy. And sometimes, that's the saddest love story of all.